I'm going to open up, and interesting common theme to me in all of your remarks was, frankly, how many different things are necessary. We look at this often as a financial problem, but as all of you have mentioned in different ways, there's a whole panoply of support here, and we know if we provide it, it really pays off. Now, having admitted that up front, I'm also going to put you on the spot collectively, and I'll start with you, Dr. Fischer, and then just work across, and ask you if you had to pick one or two things that, in your experience, are extraordinarily important for us to focus on as a committee. What would those things do? Because we're usually in the position of having to make choices up here. We never have as much money as we would like. So if you had to say, this is the one that makes a difference, the area that if you have to prioritize, where you would prioritize, I'd love to get your response. So if I can start with you, Dr. Fischer.
That's a big one because it's overall.
Oh, it's very unfair, too.
It is. I think one thing that is really important, first of all, is reaching students as soon as possible. I discovered through my children that they learned a lot about education through me, and they started talking to their friends, and I actually am able to go talk to classrooms in my kids' schools now about this process because they're curious and they want to know, and many of them don't think that they can do this. And so I think that's really important, is to start reaching them as early as possible so that they know what to dream about. And also, while we need money, financial things, many of us work multiple jobs to make this happen while some of us are taking care of kids. We also need the funding to have people available to be there for you because we don't have the support. A lot of us don't have the support that we need.
Thank you very much. Professor Thompson?
Well, you probably have guessed I've asked that in Kentucky several times. The things that we know that we have to do now, we have to be able to build capacity. We have to build on those things that work. We also have to look at how many other folk will have skin in the game to help us to do that. And one of the reasons why I like Gear Up so much, because it's a dollar-for-dollar partnership in what we create and how we do. So we get double, at least, the magnitude out of the federal dollar. But the other thing that I think is important, we have to look at, and I would agree with you, building the holistic capacity of a student. And it has to start early. But we also have to look as we get them through college. And when I say college, I mean in some cases it may just be a one-year certificate. But the idea that many of our students still drop out of college because of this gap that we're talking about. So the need for need-based aid for completion is crucial. I mean, we have research that's coming out on that all the time. So the idea of being able to build holistically the capacity from elementary school all the way through with the right kind of teachers, the right kind of inputs in the schools, and all the way through make sure that they're college ready and career ready when they go into college, but yet giving them the kind of inputs that it takes for them to be successful in college. So holistic, capacity are two of the things that I would argue that I would consider.
Great. Professor Cattleman?
My position is much easier coming third in line because I can build on the insightful comments of Dr. Thompson and Dr. Fischer. To reiterate something Dr. Thompson said, I think it's crucial to sustain need-based aid for college. There's a variety of very rigorous research showing long-term benefits from need-based aid on students' outcomes. I have worked with my colleague and mentor, Bridget Terry Long, at Harvard University, showing that a $1,300 need-based grant offered to students at the end of their senior year in high school in Florida increased the share that earned a bachelor's degree within 6 years by over 20%. Wow. I think that's a worthwhile investment in terms of the lifelong benefits that students are going to get. So I think it's very important to sustain financial aid. I also think Dr. Fisher's point is very well taken, that even with financial aid in place, students encounter very, very complex decisions in evaluating where to go to college, how to access financial aid, and maintain their aid. And there are critical junctures along that pathway where if students do not complete the FAFSA, they don't apply to a broad set of colleges, they don't renew their financial aid, students who've worked very hard, showed tremendous promise for themselves and their families, but also for our country, may fall through the cracks. And so I think figuring out ways that we can be smart and strategic in how we make help available to students. And as you heard from my testimony, I think that technology offers us low-cost and scalable solutions to connect hardworking students to one-on-one sustained advising, even if they don't have access to that in their households or their communities.
Thank you. Dr. Fitzgerald.
Well, Mr. Chairman, in the spirit of full disclosure, I spent 17 years as the staff director of the Federal Advisory Committee on Student Financial Assistance. So we've been through a lot of battles over a lot of things, not the least of which was the FAFSA. But I would point to, not to get too technical, but I'd point to two things. First of all, the purchasing of the maximum Pell Grant, because without a strong Pell Grant program, virtually nothing we're talking about here will work. The second is it's something that we tried to do to clear the information barriers, and it's something we wrote into we worked with Congress to write into the higher ed reauthorization in 1998, and that is the automatic zero. And the closer we can get the automatic zero to free and reduced lunch, the simpler the communications challenge becomes. Essentially equating federal benefit, means-tested benefit programs. Obviously, free and reduced lunch is in every school. The ability to communicate with parents about the fact that students would be eligible for a Pell Grant because they are a free and reduced lunch recipient would go a long way to reducing barriers, but it's expensive.
Thank you. And if my friend Mr. Fatah indulges me, I want to allow President Mellow to answer the question, then we'll move to him, and I'll be equally generous on the time.
Again, coming last, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said and said so well. So I'll just take a slightly different tact. I would say that the challenge of America is not just who's in college, but who should be in college. And I see those students who have dropped out of high school, especially in urban areas, especially men. We're having a crisis of men who have dropped out of high school. So I would say let's really look at the higher education continuum as starting with students who have not made it out of high school and really thinking deeply about how our workforce development dollars align with our college dollars in ways that really make sense and hold us to a high standard. But in that, make sure that we use all the available activities that have just been mentioned. And I would especially talk about technology. The work of being like a 911, sort of like get them before they fail, could be so helpful. I've seen students drop out of college because they couldn't find the babysitter when their mom who used to take care of the kids couldn't come. I've seen students walk for 2 hours to college because they didn't have a $100 a month Metro card. So little things can make a big difference, and technology can really help us see that. And the second piece is that I would really talk about deepening partnerships with business and industry, because the need of our students, particularly low-income students, to work is real. And it's real when you have 2 kids and you're working 2 or 3 jobs. It's real when you're thinking about college. So having the ability to make that connection so that the curriculum that I teach at our college is effective for my local community, and that students really have the experience to join with the business, really opens up extraordinary opportunity. One of our students who grew up poor in the Bronx, single mom, said, I've always had dreams, but until I had my internship, I never saw myself in those dreams, and that's what we want to do.
Thank you very much, and I thank my friend for being generous on the time, and Mr. Fatah, you're recognized. Thank you very much. I think my friend from Maryland makes a really important point about, because we're all worried about cost, and we're worried about resources, so we're constantly searching. But also, I reflect back on my time when I used to teach in college, or my time as a student, or just being around. And so often, you know, it's one thing to learn online if you're used to doing that and you're at home surrounded by a family that's supportive. It's quite another thing if nobody in your home's ever gone to college. I mean, you start there. So, you know, these things work for some kids, and they just simply don't for others. Dr. Fischer, I want to call on you because I think, and all of you have such wonderful, unique personal experiences, but I've found so often when I look at students, it is actually the intangible stuff that makes the difference. It is a role model when you don't come from a family that has them. It is, as you mentioned in your testimony, the support system around you, quite often from people moving through exactly similar circumstances to you, and it's having seen somebody else succeed, you sort of know that you can. So I'd like you to reflect both on your own career and your interaction with students now as a professional about those intangible things. And we can't programmatically create those things, but we do programs like TRIO where the odds of that happening go way up for a student, as opposed to when I used to teach at the University of Oklahoma as a graduate student and adjunct professor. I used to see kids showing up that were living in dormitories that were bigger than the towns they were from. And you put a kid in a dormitory with 1,000 other kids that are their age, and I guarantee you don't have a socially reinforcing learning experience going on there most of the time. So anyway, your reflections would be most welcome, and your suggestions would be helpful.
Okay. The non-financial aspects are huge. I was considering your question, Dr. Harris, because in the situation that I was in, even if online education were free and available at that point, I would have never even considered doing it because I didn't have the support or even knowledge or understand that I could. And so coming into a program where I had McNair is very unique, I believe, because the professors on campus serve as advisors, and so every time I was going through the halls, there was this connection between professors and advisors, and they were constant support, and everywhere I was, there were people telling me that I could do it and that I was doing a good job, and you do learn through that process. I think that's probably even more important than the financial, although you can't get through it without the financial. You just can't make it without those intangible things like people there all the time to support you and show you that you can.
Any of the rest of you have, again, specific strategies or examples? Again, that's just very helpful to hear, because learning is not an easily programmable, technical process. It's a very human process, and everybody approaches it in a different way and usually from a different starting point.
Mr. Chairman, one of the challenges that we're confronting is the attrition rate in the first 2 years of college. This is particularly problematic among STEM majors. 50% of STEM majors drop out of the major in the first 2 years, and a surprisingly high percentage drop out of college, even though they are well prepared. And so one of the strategies that we're using, and again, this is informing partnerships with our business members, as we create these new programs in data science and cybersecurity, social mobile cloud technologies, risk analysis and management, water materials science, et cetera, is to use the company's employees as mentors, to connect them to workforce, to a career. The honors program in cybersecurity at College Park is sponsored by Northrop. Every one of those students gets a Northrop engineer as a mentor. Each can contribute or can compete for early internships that make a huge difference. Now, this assumes they've arrived on campus and we're focused on just preserving human capital. But those connections, whether they're mentors, when students are in high school, and Northrop and our other defense contractors do a lot of that through Cyber Patriot and First Robotics and other kinds of programs. But encouraging mentorships can be exceptionally powerful.
I have to tell you, I've seen a Northrop Grumman program actually in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is a STEM program deep into the high schools. This is a high school that is now our highest performing high school in the state, and the corporate involvement there, that happens to be the home of the field artillery, and there's a big demand for computer programmers and for people that can work on very sophisticated weapon system. And what they've done there, number one's been wonderful for the community, but number two, in terms of providing a local workforce that can move into some of the operations they have there, it's just been absolutely fantastic. So appreciate you making that point. With that, if I may, I'll go to my good friend, the ranking member from Connecticut. I wanted to actually make a point and then ask a question. And I want to, number one, again, thank all of you, which I'll do at the end. But, each one of you, I think, have shown how much these programs that I think are the classic hand-up, not hand-out programs make a huge difference for us. How important it is. Mr. Tom made this point. Mr. Fitzgerald, you've all made it one way or the other. How important to us as a country, just simply to use the human talent that we have available. Secondly, I mean, it's the right thing to do, no question, but it's also it's the smart thing to do. These are investments that ultimately really, really pay off for this country. Looking across, because some of you think internationally, not just nationally, we've been focused here. Give us, and I'll let any of you pick up on this. Actually, Dr. Mellow, you may be the appropriate one to kick it off, but I'm very interested in where you would rank us relative, looking at other countries and what they're doing. I mean, there was a time when we were the unquestioned leader in the world and we provided more access than anybody else. We know that's changed a little bit, but I'm very curious about where you think we are and if there are any international strategies that you see in other places around the world that we ought to be adopting here.
Well, it's true, Chairman, that and we could we could talk for a long time about the parsing of the statistics, and there can be a lot of conversation about that. We're academics, right? We love that kind of stuff. But I would say America is slipping. And for me, people of my, so I'm 62, now you know, people of my generation are more educated, and when we were educated, than anybody else in the world. When you look at the 20 to 24, they are about 13th, and they're less educated than our generation. So we're slipping internally. Our kids are not as educated as we are, as the budding elders. I don't know what group I'm in, but we're slipping internationally. And I think our acknowledgement of that has to be serious. I don't think in any way it means that Americans are less smart, less gutsy, less committed, but I think we have to really rethink how we imagine an education system, K-12 through college, and how to bring back in those adults.
Thank you. Any others care to address that, Mr. Thompson?
Absolutely. And let me tell you, in Kentucky, we have something called Kentucky Rising now, where we're taking the best K-12 countries around the world, and we're emulating what they do right, and we're trying to replicate that in Kentucky. We want to stay cutting edge on reform in that area so they can tell us stuff. I would agree with Dr. Mellow, but I will say that we have, by the way, gaps are the biggest things that we see that are creating some of the issues that make us not as powerful in many ways in our overall growth. But I will tell you, we still have the best higher education system in the world. I mean, this is a baseline that we can play with and build off of. We still have some of the best intervention programs to try to address some of our ills. We talked about Gear Up and McNair and other TRIO programs today. So there are hopes that we can look at. One other item I will add, we've also recognized, and we're a heterogeneous nation. I mean, so many of our comparisons look very homogeneous in many ways, and I wish I had more time to talk about that, but you know what I mean. I will tell you, just like whether it's online education or face-to-face, engagement still matters, so faculty still matters. So we know we're going to have to increase the output of our teacher ed folk to help them to engage those issues in our K-12. But we also know the interaction with faculty in and out of the classroom helps the retention rate. That engagement still matters. So we have the evidence of what to do. So our baseline is strong. Now, whether we get the right inputs to help us to build that baseline, I think is what you guys are called to talk about. But we know high rigor, high expectations, and high inputs all the way through the system of education helps us to actually get back to where we need to be and where we once were forever. I mean, I like being number one.
Yeah, we know that in Kentucky. My chairman, and I think we're going to see a pretty convincing demonstration of it in short order, too. Anybody else care to make a comment?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to highlight I'll give you two examples of the ability to find talent. And these are, I won't name them, but they're two of my member companies. And it deals with computer science and the ability to grow our own talent from K-12 on up. 2 insurance companies, both facing problems on the IT side. One of them moved the entire operation to Bangalore. The other imported chief scientists from India. And that was a very bold move because, you know, you're not just taking the chief scientists and moving them to India, you're taking the entire stream of jobs and moving them. And so if you look at who is in our graduate schools, 2/3 of our graduate students in the STEM disciplines are foreign students. We have the best graduate universities in the world. But our education system is highly stratified. And if you just look at graduation rates, our Research One universities, they're in the 90%. But we desperately need a talent strategy that will pull all of our institutions up and give students opportunities to access high-demand jobs that will benefit our companies, the federal government in areas like national security, and the nation.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, because I want to pick up on a point that my friend, the ranking member, made, and I agree with in terms of resource commitment here. There's also a role, we didn't explore it here, but you know, I've seen states cutting back a lot. If you look at the percentage of what they spend in their budgets and expecting us to fill in, and which stretches our resources, because I think what we really want to do or focus on students that frankly are the most disadvantaged or the most challenged, or just frankly just have not had the chance. And that's a very important role for us as a federal government, I think, to play. You know, and it's a national mission. The second area, and this doesn't apply to any of you because frankly you work in the kind of institutions that do this automatically, but I watched my good friend, former Governor Mitch Daniels, this morning talking on Morning Joe about college education, and he made the point, you know, at Purdue, they've actually frozen tuition 3 years in a row, but he said, we're a land-grant institution. Our original mission was to educate people that were not wealthy, that did not have opportunities, and maybe we had forgotten about that a little bit, and we need to move back toward understanding what our role is. It's different than maybe an elite private university, so those are things for all of us to think of, because I think to get to where all of us want to be, it's a collective effort. There's certainly a big federal component here, but there needs to be state and local support. In my state, actually, local communities do support community colleges with taxations, and they do support career tech. They literally tax themselves to have that opportunity available. And it's up to every state to choose how they want to do that. I can't hold us up as a model because we're not always spending as much money in other areas as I'd like. I've watched the higher ed portion of our budget shrink over about the last 20 years in terms of not dollars but percentages, and the amount of the cost of education we offload on a student is considerably higher today than it was when I was a state senator in the 1980s. It's just, we've made it tougher, not easier. We have a lot of programs, but if you actually looked at it in mass, it's tougher for our kids than it ought to be. With that, I want to thank each and every one of you, not just for taking your time to be here today, because it's really important to help our committee understand the problems and to create the public record so we can make some of the decisions that we need to make going forward. But much more importantly, just thank you for what you do each and every day to make sure that people have an access to the American dream, that they get that opportunity, and that we try and address some of the inequalities and divisions and inequities in our society and give people the opportunity. You've all given us not only terrific information and great suggestions, but frankly, the telling anecdote or the personal experience that quite often drives it home. So I can see why you're all exceptional educators and very successful in your field. So it's been a great hearing and appreciate it very much. I want to thank the ranking member for being here as well. Mr. Harris, thank you. And with that, we're adjourned.